Good afternoon, Lordy. Thank you for joining us. For the audience, my name is Eric Murphy. I'm the co-curator of Recovery Act, ACT, which stands for Art, Culture, and Technology, with my co-curator, Therese Iriarte Medina. And we have Lordy Rodriguez here, and we're going to talk about his work in the exhibit. So good afternoon, Lordy. Can you let our audience, just kind of tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into your art practice, and a little bit about some of your previous pieces?
All right, good afternoon, Eric. Thanks for having me here today and for being in the show. Um, my work uses a lot of cartography references in it. They're all hand-drawn using very simple markers. So there isn't really very much of that hierarchy that we find in mediums in the art world that I use. Um, and a lot of the mapping, this history of mapping, we look at the America series. It's one of the very first series that I worked on. It was a way to reconcile with my relationship to this country. So there's no accuracy in any of my maps. There's no geographical accuracy. It's all about what kind of personal information, either it be a personal from like my family side, or social, or even political issues that I could embed in the map. And fundamentally, maps are just a visual form that's meant to translate some sort of information. And if I could find a way to manipulate that language, then that means then I could input any kind of content that I want into the map. And that's where it all kind of started. And in this America series, if you go to my website, there's a link to my America series. That's more of more of an autobiography um, of my history here in this country, represented in map form.
Okay, great, great. And then tell us if you could kind of tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you got started.
Yeah, I was born in the Philippines. Emigrated here to the United States in '79. The first place we lived in was in Baton Rouge, but I basically grew up in Texas. And now I live here in the Bay Area. And I started these drawings during college, when I was driving back and forth between Houston and in New York, where I was going to undergraduate school at the time. And I was going to undergraduate school in the '90s, so I didn't have digital maps or Google Maps or anything. Everything was these AAA fold-out maps. And there was a really great relationship or interaction with this kind of with these maps back then that inspired me to move into using cartography as my main visual language with my work.
Okay, great, great. And I'm really intrigued about the way you use your medium, your markers, and like the selection of colors. And what's so beautiful about it is the level of detail and how it. For me, when I first saw your work, I was like, "This is a digital art, but it's like all hand created." And if you could just kind of tell our audience a little bit about how you came to selecting these colors and working with these particular markers, and what were like some of the challenges and development of using them.
I knew at the beginning of working in this style that I wanted to um, have my work, or these maps, look like they've been printed, that they were that they weren't definitely hand drawn. If you look at the history of maps, you can see really old antique maps that were hand drawn, as opposed to the maps that we have the printed maps that we had in the last century and the digital maps that we have now, there is this loss of the hand. And by mimicking that computer or that printed matter with my work, I'm able to somehow convince the viewer that these might be real maps. And that was already an inherent flaw in mapping that I wanted to take advantage of. Take advantage of, I'm sorry, it's an inherent flaw in any kind of information system, that as long as you can make it look real, you can manipulate that information. A primary example of that is looking at how we view the news nowadays, where it's very difficult to tell the difference between actual news and opinion pieces. Whereas something like Fox News, which is mostly opinionated shows, are presented to us as actual news. And that's where the confusion happens with information systems. And this was a flaw that I wanted to take advantage of in maps. And so one of the first challenges that I had in the beginning of this was finding a really good medium to be able to portray this. And I found these alcohol-based inks. Back then in the 90s, they were mostly Pantone markers that I was using, and trying to match them with the right paper was always very difficult. And I landed on using Stonehenge paper, which is a very popular printmaking paper. It's very absorbent, and it really flattens out the color of the ink, so you don't see very much of the hand in there. It's very flat. It looks computer printed, and that's the effect that I wanted to get. And till this day, I still use alcohol-based inks. I use a different company. I use Copic markers now, but I still use the Stonehenge paper, and that printed look I've been able to maintain that aesthetic for the past 20 something years now.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's great. So that brings me to your work in exhibit. I had the honor of working with you in other exhibitions regarding your work, and it's been a pleasure. So I'm happy to have you in this third show we've done together.
Yeah.
And you kind of took like a different turn from cartography to this new series where you are documenting COVID deaths in the U.S. And if you can kind of tell us a little bit about what motivated you into starting this new series and how's it going?
Right. I've always tried to incorporate my interpretation of the world into my work. And since 2016, since Trump was elected, it seems that every day there is a new way to see the world. There's an event that happens that changes the way that I feel like I see where we are as a country, where we are as a species, as a people, as a country. So this, especially since 2016, I've been trying to find a way to incorporate this madness, this constant changing into my work. And it's been difficult, and I've shared the same feeling with a lot of other people where everyone just feels like you just cannot keep up.
Mm-hmm.
And
I know I do.
yeah, we all feel that way. But I also feel that it's also one of the responsibilities of an artist to be able to encapsulate these moments in history. But we don't necessarily have to just literally spell it out either. Artists are really great lenses into seeing how people saw the world at that time. You don't necessarily have to make a piece like Guernica to get um, um, to get that period in time in Europe during World War II, right? That's one way to do it. But then you could also just look at something very simple as a landscape and still get this kind of interpretation of the historical references at the time. So when I was thinking about doing something very simple, something that I could kind of execute on a daily basis, and just as a response to COVID, because the moment that it started, and even weeks before we were shelter in place, you can see the trajectory of this pandemic and how it's going to affect us culturally, not just us in America, but globally, how it will affect us culturally. This is not a one-time thing. This is going to be with us for a very long time. Its impact is going to be very huge.
Yeah.
And I feel like it is a responsibility to be able to address it. But there's also so much going on also that I feel like I want to attack everything, or not attack, but address everything. So I was trying to think of something very simple that I could address COVID. And one thing I was thinking about is these may not look like maps. These are very simple grids of quarter-inch squares. And I wrote down a list long time ago of the 5 different things that you need to have in order to make a map, right? So you need like a legend is one of them, right? A border, a compass rose is another thing that you need to have in order to be officially a map. And one of the things is a grid, and that grid helps you break up the picture plane of the map in order to find things easier. So if you're looking at a map, and these are a lot of the older maps too, if you're trying to find a spot on the map, you'd look in the index and it would say something like A4, and you would go on your grid, look for the grid of A4, and you could find what you're looking for. Of course, in digital maps, you don't need that because you could just type it in and it'll bring you right there. But grids were such a very important visual element and informational element to maps. So I decided to just make a grid, this very flat, very devoid of any kind of detail that can actually be a distraction. I just wanted to focus on just that one number of deaths, daily deaths from COVID. And the colors that I chose, or actually I didn't choose the colors at all. What I did was, for example, on March, if I'm remembering right, March 26th, which I think is one of the pieces in the show.
Yeah, I was trying to remember which March date that was. Yeah.
Yeah, there was like 1,727 people that died that day. So I made a grid of 1,700 people, or 700 squares, and ran a random number generator of 1,700 entries that I needed, of different numbers, and each of my markers is I associated a number with it, and I would print out this list, translate them into the markers that I use. Yeah, so this is March 12th. So on March 12th, there were 1,727 people that died that day. I ran that number through a random number generator, and these were the numbers that I got. And there's something about using that randomness, because we could easily memorialize every single death that happened by putting the names of the person in. But one of the most insidious things about this disease is that it can happen, any one of us can get it.
Yeah, that's the scary part.
Yeah, exactly. And it's completely random on where, well, actually, it's not really random on how this spreads, but the way that we can, the way we keep track of it is totally random, because we're not testing as much as we need to. We're completely blind on the spread of this disease. So because of the ineptitude of the government, it does feel like this disease is spreading in a very random fashion, even though it's not, but it is because we're blind to it. So
Exactly.
by using the random number generator, it's a way to sort of encapsulate our relationship or our way of dealing with this pandemic.
Wow. And so when I received these works from you, you had what, say about 15 or 20 or so or something like that. Where are you at now?
Ooh, uh, probably around 20 or so.
Wow.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. The very first month and a half of the very first month, it's actually quite. I have a lot. It's easy to make because there's only the range is anywhere between one square that I would make to maybe 100 or a couple hundred, which are really tiny squares or grids on these drawings. And all these drawings are 18 by 18 inches, so they're all the same size. And those are pretty fast to make. But when you start getting into April, when we're averaging around 2,000 a day, those actually take much longer time than I thought it would be. So, and then into May and June, the numbers go down a little bit, but then they're shooting back up right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, so it's something that I thought was a very simple, I could do on a daily basis is turning out to be a lot harder to do because our daily counts are so high, and
Hmm.
we're still going.
Exactly, and that kind of brings me to one of my questions: is if all of the paper size are 18 by 18, are you at a point where you can't? Are the numbers are at a point where you can't even fit them onto the paper, or are we? I'm losing a little track of the daily COVID deaths. So have they reduced more like the one that you did for May, or are they at the point they're extending beyond the size of your paper?
So when I chose the size, 18 by 18, the most that I could fit in there of quarter-inch squares was around 3,000. So my choice of 18 by 18 was kind of an optimistic choice, thinking that
Hmm.
yeah, we won't get past this number. And actually, luckily, we haven't gone past the height of 2,600 daily deaths, and I'm hoping we don't. So that's actually kind of an optimistic part of it. Uh,
Hmm.
right now, so see, June we started to see a dip. So the average, there's a 7-week average number, and that was around 500 or so. And now we're averaging around anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500. So we're not up to the height that we were in April,
Okay.
but we are increasing. There is the potential for us to reach 3,000, as a lot of super spreading events have happened recently in a lot of the southern states. So we can see a rise, but we're also seeing a lot of therapeutics being introduced into our care, which is also reducing the death rates too. So there's all of these really different factors that are happening at the same time that are keeping our numbers somewhat not as high as it was before. Um, so we're at a steady pace of 1,000 to 1,500, but that's still an incredible amount to think about.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's like thinking about your work. It just really keep my mind. in perspective of where we're at. And to me, it feels like, kind of like you're dealing with the same issues that a lot of the scientists are dealing with Fauci and many of them. They had a very simple, like you did with the paper. It's like, okay, I'm optimistic that we won't reach a point that I won't get beyond this paper. And as you see things starting to develop, and just like the scientists, they're like, okay, if we get everybody to do their testing, we get everybody to wear their mask, and we during this period of time we should be okay, and the numbers should look like this, and everything is just really weighed on people's cooperation, and that changes a lot of your projection as to uh, um, what you had planned in terms of capturing the numbers, and what the scientists are dealing with in terms of keeping track of the numbers and hoping to lower the curve is, share some parallel. And I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that was actually one of the challenging parts of this series is getting accurate information. Um, the two main sources that I'm using right now is the CDC and a website called worldmeter.info. Excuse me. And um, of course, there's different circumstances or different criteria that they use to uh, for the official daily count of deaths. But in the past few weeks, that information has been lagging with the CDC. And actually, this other website, worldmeters.info, have been more accurate in their information. But even that the piece that you showed earlier of April 12th, which had 1727 deaths, that day is actually different now. When they retroactively go back and add more cases, more deaths that can be attributed to COVID, it actually changes. So April 12th actually has a different number now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the only disclaimer that I have with these works is this number of deaths is based off of the current information that I have at the time that I made it. So it could actually be different.
Wow.
And the numbers seem most off with the CDC, but world meters, even though their numbers, they update their information, they usually give you a reason why it's been updated or where those numbers are coming from. So it's a little bit more accurate, but that's been one of the challenging things is trying to find accurate information. And
Yeah,
that seems to be lacking.
yeah. So I got two more quick questions for you. One, can you tell us what recovery means to you, either historically, personal, or otherwise? And then after that, if you can let us know, let people know where they can follow and see more of your work.
Great. Recovery. I think recovery is an interesting concept because it seems so individualized to each one of us and our personalities. And I think for me, recovery starts with addressing what you're recovering from. I guess identifying the point of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
where it came from, and how you reacted to it. Um, so in this case, with COVID, even though it's still ongoing, um, and it's affecting everybody. You know, we all have to be shelter in place. We all have to change our behaviors, and um, doing this piece would be my way of recovering from this. Um, Luckily, I haven't lost anyone close to COVID. I mean, of course, I know people that have died from it,
Mm-hmm.
especially in our line of work in the professional in the art world. We've lost people. I have had family members that have had COVID and have gone to the ER, and having to be confronted with that so closely. Um, for me, the recovery from all this is just reconciling my relationship to the people that have had COVID and working on this series as a way to visually deal with it.
Mm.
So fundamentally, I would say recovery starts with addressing that point of trauma, and that's where for me, that's where I would usually start. Unfortunately, that since 2016, it feels like there's been plenty of points of trauma to address.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, exactly. So real quick, give us, tell us your website again, and if you have an Instagram, Facebook, so we can follow you.
Yes. So on Instagram, I'm Lordy Rodriguez. You could also visit my website at lordyrodriguez.com. And also visit my gallery's website, hosfeldgallery.com, which they're a gallery in San Francisco. And
Yeah, much thanks to Hospital.
yeah, good. And yeah, I'm actually having my next solo show there in October. I specifically asked for the October slot, so that way the run of my show corresponds with the election in November.
Great,
A
great.
lot of this work in this show will have my newest work, which is based off of gerrymandered congressional districts and protests and maps of protest marches.
Oh wow, I gotta see that.
Yeah, it'll be the show is called Polar Democracy. Polar, not as in not in the Arctic or Antarctic poles, but more like polar as in polarity, where we
Yeah.
have the power of citizenship through voting being hampered by gerrymandered districts, and on the other side of that coin is voicing our opinions of our representatives through protests and marches. So even though these are two very different series, they're two series that work in tandem with each other, because in the center of these two series is the the right to vote and the right to voice one's expression.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you,
Yep.
Lordy Rodriguez. If you want to see more of his work from the Recovery Act exhibition, visit Roots, plural, rootsartistregistry.com/Recovery Act. Again, that's rootsartistregistry.com/Recovery Act. And you can see more Lordy's work from the exhibition. Thank you so much, Lordy. I enjoyed you. That was so enlightening, and I can't wait to see your exhibit in October. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
All right, bye.